Nothing is more important to the success of a startup than the first 10 engineers you hire. That's why I started First 10. Hi, I'm Boris Epstein, CEO of First 10, and with me is my colleague,
Alexis Munger. Hi. At First 10, we work with early founders to help build early engineering teams.
And this is the First 10 podcast, where we bring you valuable insights on building early engineering teams from all sides of the equation. Engineers, founders, even investors. On today's episode of the First 10 podcast, we thought it would be a good idea to do a session on tips for founders looking to build early engineering teams. It is such a unique world being in this space, working with first-time founders, second-time founders, early engineers. The learnings come through on a very regular basis. So Alexis and I thought we'd compile these learnings. These are learnings based on very recent experiences building teams under the First 10 brand, and also lessons from previous experience building teams for companies over the last decade under the Bink banner, for startups that were really small when we built them, but have since grown to a later stage. So we've compiled these tips to the top 7, and we're really excited to share them with you. Now, we're not going to include tips 8, for example. So tip 8, for example, is implement a rigorous interview process. That's really important. It's very important to implement a rigorous interview process.
Yeah.
The more actually rigorous and strict you could be with your interview process, the better you'll likely do in the evaluation of candidates. But that's tip number 8. We're going to exclude that from this session, and we're going to specifically start with number 7. 7. We're going to start with 7. We're going to keep it to top 7 tips. We thought 8 would be much. So we'll start with 7, and then we'll work our way down to the top tip for founders looking to build early engineering teams. So I'll start us off.
All right.
And then it'll be fun to see what we came up with.
Love it.
Tip number 7, pay competitive base and equity. Okay.
Yes.
Sounds really straightforward. I'm sure every founder knows this, but there really is a method to paying not only competitively, but paying what it takes to attract the quality of team that you're looking for. And there's actually, some interesting latitude that founders have in setting up their comp philosophy to match their company philosophy and to match the, culture they're trying to breed. A company could pay, top dollar in base and go a little bit lower in equity. A company could pay a little bit lower in base and go a little bit higher in equity. A company could pay higher in base and higher in equity. I heard a story, and there's an article out there around how Stripe built its early engineering team, and they actually allocated a larger percent, considerably larger percent of their total equity pool to their early team, knowing how important that early team was to the success of the respective company.
Yeah.
I think from an ideal perspective, a company pays at least competitive base. They don't want target candidate to not be able to afford to work there.
Yeah.
So something, reasonable and commensurate, and then pay a little bit higher, pay a little bit more competitive in equity, knowing that equity is the primary reason that a candidate ultimately joins a startup.
How do you feel about dealer's choice when companies give candidates sort of the option to either opt for a higher base, lower equity, or vice versa?
I love that. We're working with a startup right now that presents every candidate with 2 offers, one lower base, higher equity, and one higher base, lower equity.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty perfect because then the candidate doesn't have to worry about negotiating, and they know they can optimize their comp package to, their respective lifestyle and preference, and both, are within the parameters of what's reasonable for the company.
Yeah.
I actually love that.
I think it's great. And I think it'll allow you to kind of hire a diverse range of candidates, especially if your product is kind of dependent on having multiple perspectives. And there's a lot of, I think in early stage, a lot of people kind of get left out of that sort of market because maybe at the stage of life where they're at, maybe they're raising kids, maybe they're taking care of parents, and they're like, I'd love to do this, but I can't quite take the hit on the upfront cash because it just wouldn't fit into my budget. But that could be a great way to sort of, diversify who you're capturing and attract some great talent that, would maybe not be able to take the opportunity otherwise.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And there's a whole session that we could do just on equity and how to frame equity, how to talk about the upside of equity. Mm-hmm. But for now, we'll leave the tip as be intentional about the compensation package that you design, be intentional about the equity and its respective value.
Yeah.
And don't be scared to color a little bit outside of the lines specifically to match the culture and incentives that you're looking to foster.
Yeah.
And with that, let's jump to tip number 6, Alexis.
Ooh, I have a good one for number 6. So it's really simple, but you should move your process really quickly. And I don't even think that applies to like early stage. I think that applies to like anybody, but I think we've probably both collectively seen what happens when the process drags on. It's not maybe really clear when the end is in sight. It's not like a streamlined process and it sort of takes time, or when there is like a streamlined process, but making decisions and getting back, all of that takes time and, but recruiting is all momentum based. And so being able to capitalize on that momentum when you meet a candidate that you like, interviewing them quickly, getting that signal and showing that, you're moving them through the process because you're invested in, in that candidate and you want to see the complete loop go through. It's great. I think we used to have data at Bink. I remember this about like the ideal time in process.
Yeah.
And what was it like? I think 30 days is like beautiful for making hires.
That's ideal. I'd say for a larger company, we mostly work with slightly later stage. Now, later stage for first 10 is A round and upwards. But for seed companies,
you can move faster.
I mean, these companies don't have bureaucracy. They don't have hoops to jump through. They don't have, large groups they need to gather for consensus.
That's a competitive advantage and you should fully be using it. If you are talking to a candidate that is talking to, maybe more of like a Series C company in addition to yours, you should move quickly and try and build on that momentum before these other companies get there before you do.
Yeah.
So
I'm trying to think in my head of like the fastest hire that we've made or the fastest, process that we've seen ran through.
This happened to me a few years back when we were at Bink, but I think the fastest one I ever made was 2 weeks. It took 2 weeks and it was a Series A company that just streamlined it. They liked this candidate. They interviewed them. There was chemistry and they went for it and it worked.
That's fast.
Yeah.
I'm thinking here at First 10, we made a hire. One of our hires was a 4-day interview process. We introduced them on Thursday.
Yeah.
They had a competitive offer with one of the FANGs and they were able to move them from Thursday through Tuesday.
Yeah.
Interview with the hiring manager on Friday, full loop on Monday, closing call with the founder on Tuesday, offer, close.
Yeah.
That's like startup speed, and the startup can do that.
Yeah.
A big company can't do that no matter how bad they want to.
No, because they have too many boxes to check. I think another tip I would give founders out there who want to move quickly is think about doing batch interviews. Like, so if you're a busy founder, recruiting, you're spending an hour, 45 minutes with each candidate. It takes up time. That's totally a thing. But I recommend batch interviews because it's something that you can block off on your calendar. Tell your recruiter or for anybody that you're working with, like our goal is to have this X many candidates to evaluate, and you do it round robin style all one day with the goal of like producing an offer within like a certain time frame. I think it's a good way to compare and contrast candidates. You interview and you see a lot of people at the same time. You're able to compare those people right then and there versus like a trickle effect where you're just sort of talking to one person a week. Do it all in one shot. Get it done. Move fast.
I love that. That's kind of exciting. If a founder's doing that with the recruiters, telling a recruiter, hey, we have 4 on-site slots to fill on this day, that'll get a recruiter to move.
Oh, absolutely. No, yes. Because it makes...
We would hustle for those spots.
So fast. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I love that tip. Let's jump to tip number 5. Tip number 5 is leverage your network. This might seem really straightforward, but I'm going to walk through the framework that you could use to leverage your network. So leveraging your network, the people who you know, could be a great channel for talent. So try this. make a list of the best people who you've worked with at your last places of employment. Don't worry about who's looking. Don't worry about who's gettable. Don't worry about who might or might not be interested. Just make a list of the best people who you've worked with. Make a list of the best people that you went to university with. Sit down with your co-founder, sit down with your current engineering team, and have them make a list of all these people as well. Once you have this list, let's say you can get it up to your top 50, your top 100 or so people, make that your target, your ultimate mission to recruit from that list. So once you have that list, then you have your message or the reason that these people should be excited and interested in you, and start going after them.
Yeah.
You might get some no's. You might get some people that want to sit down with you. Ask to sit down and tell them a little bit about what you're working on. Sheer curiosity will likely get you that coffee or that phone call. Tell them about what you're up to and take a real shot at hiring these people. Any of these people, based on you knowing that they're good, they're going to come back to you interested. It's worth it to shoot your shot and go after that network. If they happen to not be interested, maybe they could share with you some feedback about what about you're working on might be a little bit not ideal for them. That's a great channel for feedback. Use that feedback to adjust your pitch.
Yeah.
If they're not interested, ask for referrals, right? Good people know other good people.
Yep. Most
of the early startups that we work with have built a reasonable chunk of their early team, if not their full early team, by referrals. So if you're a founder, you should be able to hire a handful of people through your network.
Yeah. I think that founders should be doing this before they should exhaust this option before reaching out to a recruiting agency fully.
Yeah.
Because those are people that you trust, that you know, you've worked with. You probably don't have to invest a lot of time interviewing them up front because you already know what they're capable of.
Yeah.
It just seems like the path of least resistance if you're going about it that way versus like, maybe thinking about that and then also throwing in a recruiting agency in the mix. Like I would exhaust that first. And then once you've tapped that out, go to a recruiting agency.
It's definitely ideal if you're able to do that. What some companies do is they'll do both in parallel. They'll go after their network while hiring a recruiting firm to bring in talent from outside networks. And something that, one of our current clients is doing, which is, I guess a blending of both worlds, is we're mining their networks, right? We're putting the talent in front of them who are a part of their network. They just don't have the bandwidth to do it. They're busy selling their product to customers. Yeah. And then the founder's giving feedback on people in their network. And then we're systematically engaging their network for interest in the opportunity, right? So that's a nice way to like leverage a search firm to go after a network.
First 10 can help you with your mining needs of your network.
Yes, First 10 can. Love it. Let's go to tip number 4.
Ooh, okay. So the tip number 4, hire for aptitude. Yeah. So, I mean, as you're kind of going through the interview process and figuring out how to vet for, these skills and attributes that will ultimately lead to the best founding team possible. I think it's really ideal to look for engineers that can demonstrate they know how to problem solve. A lot of what you're doing in building an early stage company is you're coming across a lot of problems that probably have never been solved before or done before. So you can't really hire for experience in that way, but you can hire for people who are just really smart and really can think about problems in a out of the box way. And I would, as you're going through that interview process, think of questions that kind of probe for their ability to do that. Where have they done that in the past when they didn't know how to do something? How did they figure it out? How did they leverage it? What they do to get themselves unstuck? I think another really great attribute is somebody who takes ownership over their product and what they're building, that they feel a personal sense of pride about what they're doing. I would look for engineers that are very comfortable working across the stack, maybe less specialized, but more like, hey, I can be stretched, breadth wise, or I can go deep on a subject if you need me to. But I think that early on, you need people who are willing to just sort of jump in and do what's necessary, not necessarily focused on what their swim lane is. Like maybe everybody's in each other's swim lane at that point because that's what makes sense. So hiring for people that can really think outside of the box. They don't get deterred by tough stuff. They can push through and think through these things and are comfortable and willing to kind of do what's needed to drive the product forward. It's
really interesting that you mentioned that, because it really speaks to the culture of an early stage startup, right? An early startup is so undefined and there aren't processes in place, and there are learnings on the daily, and roadblocks come up and twists and turns and all sorts of kind of unexpected. It's crazy, right? I mean, we just did a podcast, and I remember Andrew was talking about how chaotic early stage startup is, and you really just need people that can kind of go with the flow and problem solve through all of the unexpected issues. And there isn't a lot of management bandwidth, right? So the ownership piece.
Yeah.
I wonder if it seems to be important to founders to hire people that have had some of that 0 to 1 or early development experience, right? So finding people that have worked in an early startup before, or maybe have built something from scratch within the confines of a larger startup. Like someone who's done that has a higher likelihood of having some of these attributes, right, that you mentioned.
What do you think about, and I think about this a lot, maybe somebody hasn't had the experience, but they really want it. Like, how do you know, when you're talking to an engineer, how can you tell that maybe if they haven't had that experience of building from scratch, but they feel ready for it? How do you tell that that's the right person to hire? Like, is there a signal, or is there something that, a spark with certain candidates, that the things that they're like, their personality that just seems like they could do really well, even if they haven't had the demonstrative experience before?
Yeah, that's a good one. I've heard our founders talk about that as passion, or they've talked about that. I've heard a founder talk about that as intentionality.
Yeah.
If you're out there listening, right, you'll know who we're talking about. And so sometimes we'll talk to candidates and you could tell they're specifically interested in the domain of our startup.
Yeah.
They're excited about it. It's like the one that they want to work within. How do we know they're excited about it besides the tone of their voice and the kind of excitement that they express? Well, maybe they've read about it. Maybe they've contributed to some open source projects and they're able to point to those projects on their GitHub. Maybe they've built some side projects that are related to that domain.
Yeah.
Those are some really nice ways to exemplify passion, exemplify excitement, and to overcome maybe not having that formal 0 to 1 build, or not having that, formal early development experience. So note to engineers out there, if you're excited about something, go out there and start contributing to open source. Go out there and start building projects, develop a little portfolio of some of these examples. Even if they're not like great and, amazing things, they tend to be a nice showcasing of what you're excited about and what a startup that you're interviewing with can expect you to be excited about.
Yeah. I like it when candidates tell me that, you explain what the product is and they tell you that they have like a personal connection to that, whatever it is. Like, I studied this thing in college, it's very related to this, or I actually had an idea for this once and I wanted to build it, but I love it when candidates can get excited because there's like a special, like a personal connection to the company. Like that's somebody you I think you should talk to those people, because if they're excited about it, that's the person that's going to wake up every day energized to grind it out, multiple hours a day on this thing.
Yeah, I agree with. I love the school example. I'll often ask what excited a person about their field of study. What was their favorite class? Right? How they thought about that passion when they started their first job. How they're thinking about that in their next role, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to give another example, because AI is really popular. A lot of the companies are building in the AI space, and a lot of startups will want somebody either with experience in AI or at least with an excitement for AI. And then contrasting that, we'll talk to candidates. We can have candidates who have experience with AI. It's already been around for at least 2 years, if not longer, if you go back and just ML specific. So they'll either have experience with AI professionally, or they'll have experience with AI personally, working on some pet projects or working on some open source projects or something like that. Then you'll have some people that are like, oh, I'm definitely open to AI, definitely interested in it. And then you kind of ask them, like, what have you done with AI? And they're like, oh, I've play around with Chat GPT, and be like, in what way? Be like, oh, I ask it questions. Be like, oh, so like the same as my friends who have nothing to do with tech, right? We all kind of do that, but like, how have you expressed your interest in like some way beyond the average person?
Yeah.
And so really looking for like something to run with. Otherwise founders aren't going to be excited about you, unfortunately.
No, especially if you sound too like, oh, I'm open to anything. It sort of makes like, I don't think that's like a great answer for if you're interviewing with like an early stage founder. They want to see that you are specifically targeting this thing.
Yeah.
Versus like, I'm open to anything.
Yeah. That's massive. And I love the kind of parlay into that, because moving into tip number 3. Tip number 3 is define your culture early.
Yeah.
Defining culture could come in a couple of different forms. Some people think about culture as like, a list of values or like this pretty kind of like culture document. It could be that. That's what it ultimately comes up with. But a culture is really like, what's your company about?
Yeah.
Like, what are the people who work at your company? What binds you?
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, it's the pursuit of the mission. Our company culture is this like excitement and passion and like relentless pursuit of our mission. Or our company culture is, we come into the office all day and we're really, excited to work on the problems that we work on. We really kind of like geek out on the problem set. And even when we're not trying to solve the problem, we're like, working on things related to the problem, like, puzzles, or maybe it's a culture of open source where like everyone's bonded on the, advancement of the open source project that you're all, working towards. Or maybe it's a culture of kind of, different tangent. Maybe it's a lifestyle culture where everyone, lives in a slightly different place and you all kind of bond over the kind of flexibility and adaptability within which you're able to do your work while appreciating the lifestyle that you all live or the travels that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
Or maybe everyone on the team is just, a few years out of college and you're all kind of bonding of that like up and coming, we're going to, take on the world culture. Or maybe you're at a, slightly different stage in your career. And maybe everyone is everyone's second or third time startup and you're really bringing that, culture of experience to the startup. There's so many different, flavors of culture.
Yeah.
Being intentional about what that culture is important to think about up front so that you could, 1, define it and talk about it when asked, and 2, look for it right when bringing people in so you could add and, continue to build onto your culture.
Agree.
+1.
+1.
+1.
Yeah. I remember when back in the day when this is also like a Bink reference, but Airbnb was they were very intentional about their culture. I don't know if you remember this.
All about the belonging, right?
All about belonging, but they were very like into wanderlust and traveling and not just like staying in a big hotel. Like they wanted people who were like excited about actually building community and living in somebody else's house and getting to know them and getting to know the people in an area versus like just the very stereotypical like vacation travel where you go somewhere and you don't immerse yourself in somebody's culture. Like that was their culture. And they were also very, very into like being a good host and being like, opening doors for people and showing people, through their offices. And like, that was something that they really, really were big on. And I loved that culture with them. It fit in so perfectly to what they did.
It fit their brand. Yeah. It fit their brand perfect. You just reminded me of when Pinterest came up.
Yeah.
Pinterest was like unapologetic about like, you must love Pinterest in order to work at Pinterest, right?
Yeah.
It was just a big thing. It was like, like we can't, no matter how good somebody was, if they, didn't take the time to use the product and like be into the product, then it wasn't a fit, right? They needed people that were product enthusiasts so that no matter what part of the, company you were a part of, whether product designer or a data engineer, right? You needed to be able to connect your work back to the moving forward of the product.
Yeah.
You could probably have a lot of fun no matter what startup you're building, right? Like people at SpaceX are, enthusiasts about space industry. I mean, whatever you're building, the enthusiasm around what you're building and then somehow connecting that to something like fun, like Airbnb did with travel or Pinterest did with, like employee pinboards, right?
Yeah. I know. It's so cool. I think about it now and I'm like, they did a really good job with that. And they were very clear about that interview too, when they interviewed candidates for assessing that culture. Like it was a big part of it. They believed it. And then I think built a really awesome product because of it.
And, it's tough for startups to get to this level of intentionality. But, once a startup there are excellent exercises that a company could go through to define, hey, what is our mission? Hey, what are our values, right? And then living those values in the form of highlighting people who exemplify those values, infusing ways into the kind of day-to-day of the company to showcase those values. Zappos is a brand that comes up that did an incredible job of really, living by their values. And they built a company culture around that. And there's some great examples of that. I think the message in this case is define your culture early, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
And then use the culture to, one, differentiate yourself in the eyes of the candidate, and then two, use your culture to make sure that people who you bring in are aligned and additive to the culture that you're building.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's even a really good segue into the next tip that I have.
Tip number 2. Wow. We're getting up there. Tip number 2. So we're top 2 tips here.
Got to craft a compelling story about your company and your product and what your mission is. You gotta know that story.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. Got to craft a narrative that really resonates with whoever these potential hires are. So really understanding what your mission is, what are your values, and then what's the impact that candidate can have by joining your team. And we talk about a lot value proposition. That's like a favorite. I think that's a buzzword of ours. We've been throwing that one around for many years now.
Yeah.
But it's understanding like what is the problem that you're solving in the world, what your company is doing about it, how your team is contributing to your company's mission, and then ultimately tying that back to the individual and how they're going to be a part of that, and being able to tell that narrative to candidates in a way that's exciting, that gets them energized about what you're trying to do. Even if they ultimately become not the right fit for your company, you still want that person to walk away with a really good, positive sense for your company and what you're trying to do, because you never know.
Right.
You never know down the road. They could send you referrals. They could become a customer of yours, whatever it is. It's always having that compelling story and being able to convey that is like the most important thing you can do as a founder.
100%. And stories are memorable, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whether it's stories of, situations, right? Hey, I got to tell you this story. I got to tell you what just happened, right? Or our personal stories, right? Like where we came from and where we're going, or in this case, like the stories of our startups, right? I mean, think about like the founding story of Apple, right? Or the founding story of Microsoft, or like the founding story of any great company. Like where were they in their early days, right? Who's this, founder person? What compelled them to go through all the craziness and hardship to like start this company, right? When you think about a big company, their early stories, cool, right? It's kind of interesting. It kind of makes up the DNA.
Yeah.
When you're an early startup, there's some reason that compelled the founder to quit their job, sacrifice everything that they have to sacrifice to do this startup. It compelled investors to fund them. Like there was something there. So like, what's that story?
Yeah.
I remember like we used to have a framework that talked about like the framework for structuring a story, right? Like what's going on in the world, what's going on in the company, what's going on in the team, right? And then what's going on with you. So there's some nice ways to do that. But I think talking about the world component, I think that's a really nice way to create some perspective for your story. So like, it's common for a story to start out with like, hey, here's the background of the founder. And then here's why, I, the founder, decided to start this company. Here's what I saw going on in the world. And that really upset me. It frustrated me. And so we decided to put a team together to build this thing. And then this thing is really addressing this problem in a unique and compelling way. And if you come join us, then we have a real shot at making this really, really big impact that could turn into this, insert, mission or vision here.
Yeah.
Right. And you kind of apply a framework like that to almost whatever you're building. But if you could kind of say that in a way that compels the candidate, the candidate can walk away saying like, yeah, I want to be a part of that story, or that story is memorable. I can go like, tell people that I care about that story, right?
Yeah.
And maybe get them excited about it too.
Or that story doesn't resonate with me at all. And then that person isn't right for you.
Yeah. Thank you for telling me your wonderful story. But that's not for me. Right?
Yeah. It's kind of like, I'm a big fan of superheroes and like comic books, and I love origin stories.
Ooh.
And it's sort of like a founder has to have their origin story, right? And they have to have that built into the narrative of like, this is why this is important. This is the origination of this idea. This is where I got this. This is why I saw this. And I think those are really cool. It's a key part of that whole narrative and talking to candidates about why you're doing what you're doing.
I love that example because, we could even kind of go a little further and say like, right, there's a superhero in all of us. Mm-hmm. So what would happen if we went out and watched our favorite superhero movie, right? And then kind of crafted our story based on like, what's our superhero story, right? So maybe a founder, who's having trouble recruiting, maybe founders who's having trouble attracting good talent. Maybe we could, compel them. Hey, what's your superhero story, right? Like, what's the superhero version of what's happening here? I really love that.
Yeah.
We should bring that into some of our founder conversations.
There's something there.
There's definitely something there.
There's something there. I like it.
I was talking to a company today. I'm not going to name names. They're building a really great business, and you could tell that they're really excited about what they're building. But the way they describe it doesn't sound exciting, unclear what it is even that they're doing. And then the story isn't exciting or believable. Like, it kind of just is all flat.
Yeah.
Despite the business being really exciting and doing really well. Right. And so they're obviously struggling in recruiting, right? Because, what they're putting out there isn't getting responded to. Mm-hmm. And that sucks, right? Because there's something like great there that's not being, it sucks, right?
That sucks.
It sucks.
It's a mistake.
It sucks, right? I mean, bad stories suck, right? Especially when there's a good story there to be told.
I agree. I know. You got to think about yourself as a superhero.
Think about yourself as a superhero.
Think about your origin story.
I like that. I think one other thing to add to this is a startup will never do better in their recruiting than the quality of their story.
I think that's true.
The better the story, the better the recruiting, the better the quality of talent that they'll be able to attract. The weaker the story, the weaker the quality of talent that they'll be able to attract, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely.
So big one at tip number 2. Parlaying that into tip number 1, which I'm going to be Captain Obvious for this one. Hire the strongest possible candidates that you can. Hire the best possible talent that you're able to.
Yeah.
I'm going to put on my total Captain Obvious hat here, but startups are faced with a lot of pressure, right? Startups need to hire people because they have a roadmap of product that they need to build. Startups have investor money that they need to deploy in order to build product fast, in order to show returns, in order to show gains. Speed is a function, right? So there's a lot of pressure to hire fast versus hiring well. I think every startup will say, we only hire A's. I've never met a startup that said we're looking for B's, right? This doesn't exist. Everyone's hiring A's. Everyone wants the best people. But then you see that in their actions that weak startups don't have hiring bars. Weak startups prioritize speed versus quality. Weak startups have loosely or undefined standards. Whereas strong startups say, we want the best quality team possible.
Yeah. Founders
come from a strong quality background. They extend that to early team members that they've likely been able to recruit through their network. So now we have founders with strong backgrounds. Now we have early team members with strong backgrounds. And we have this insistence that employee number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, and so on and so forth is equally strong, if not stronger. Now, strength of background could mean pedigree, it could mean previous place of employment. Likely those are just indicators, but what those two things usually associate with is ability to solve harder problems faster, ability to write cleaner, more creative code, ability to innovate in a more unique ways. Candidates with a strong foundation cover a number of the tips that we shared here, right? Like their strong culture adds. They bring those intangibles to the table. They're passionate about the mission, and founders, early startups would do well to define what their bar is. Mm-hmm. Like, what's the quality of person that we're looking for, and not stray from it. So do what it takes. Do what it takes means uplift your story to be able to compete with that quality of talent, right? Go after your network. And even though the first 30 people who you reached out to who claim to be your friends aren't even responding to you, go after person number 31, right? With a better story, right? Because you have to hire the best people possible in order to increase the likelihood for your startup to be successful. Otherwise, the odds are just against you.
I'll add to this. I think this is like a good call out for co-founders, not necessarily where there's only one founder. but make sure that you and your co-founder are on the same page about what all of these, how you're defining all of these things, because if you both have two different ideas, that's going to make it very, very tough to figure out. So like, I think having like an early conversation before you even kick off these things about what it is that we're identifying and what we need, and being on the same page and intentional about that, also very key to that, making that strong foundational hire.
I agree with that. And exactly why you're bringing that up. And that might speak to tip number 8, which we did not include in these top 7 tips about the implementing of a rigorous interview process, right? Because if you have a tight interview process with a rubric for acceptable answers that meet your quality bar, you're not going to run into that problem that you just mentioned.
No, you'll all be on the same page.
Right? But too bad this wasn't a top 8 tips, right? It was just 7.
It was just 7.
It was just 7. Hopefully founders will be able to figure that out on their own.
Part 2 of this podcast, we'll go into 8.
Yes.
8 through 16. I don't know.
How high should we go?
15.
I mean, there's a lot, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot we didn't cover, right? We didn't talk about implementing a rigorous interview process. We didn't talk about a culture of transparency. We didn't talk about the importance of communication. We didn't talk about onboarding.
No.
We didn't talk about the cultures of learning. I mean, there's a lot that we didn't cover in these top 7 tips, but these top 7 tips will get founders quite a distance.
Should get you a
in
ways.
terms of building of, it should get them a ways.
Yeah.
It should get them a ways.
It'll get you there. It'll get you there.
And for any help that any of these founders need along the way, right? Maybe we can help.
Reach out to First 10, and then we could tell you the other tips that we didn't mention.
Yes. Reach out anytime for tips 8 through 12. Well, we hope you enjoyed these top 7 tips and find really good value from them. In fact, we want to hear from you. If you did find value in one of these tips, reach out. Maybe we could have you on as a future guest to talk about where recruiting was before you heard these tips, how you adapted one of these tips to your hiring process, and then what sort of improvement you found. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I would. I would like to hear from somebody.
I would too. Yeah. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Do let us know what you thought of our episode on our Twitter or LinkedIn. Look for the links in the show notes. Both Alexis and I are not professional podcasters, as I'm sure you could tell. We just love talking about early stage startups.
And if there's a recruiting related question you'd like answered, or you could use help with anything hiring related, jump on our website. It's www.first10.com. That's 1st10.com. And we'll do our best to get that answered for you.
Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. My name is Boris, and with me is
Alexis Munger.
And we'll see you next time on the First 10 Podcast.
Bye.